Welcome to the Stars and Stripes Multifamily Apartment Investing Podcast, broadcasting from the three-country region of Switzerland, France, and Germany. Get ready to meet amazing industry rock stars and learn how they think, what they do, and what makes them successful. Now, here's your host and investor, Marcel T. Rutz.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode. And today we have a guest. It's Bryan Amos. Bryan Amos is the founder and CEO of the Omni Group, which is comprised of Omni Multifamily Assessments, Construction, and Multifamily Investments. Bryan has evaluated over 300 plus multifamily properties, probably more for now, and more than 70,000 units with a total value of over $2 billion or even more dollars. I'm glad to have him here. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Marcel. Glad to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Very good, Bryan.
Excellent. Really privileged to be here. Thanks, Marcel.
It's a pleasure to have you back in the show. Hey, Bryan, where are you located right now?
So I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in Texas, right in the center of the USA.
Is that the place where you also grew up? And can you also tell us, how did you start investing in the real estate?
Sure. So I was born in Texas. But when I was little, my parents, we moved to California. So I actually grew up in California, graduated high school there, and then went to college at Baylor University, which is in Waco, in the center of Texas. And I got a degree in engineering and stayed here, started to work here, and now I have a family here. And so been here now for about 25 years. So, I consider myself a full-fledged Texan. And when I started in engineering, I always knew I wanted to be in business for myself, right? I wanted to be an independent person. And we went through the dot-com bubble back in the early 2001. And I was working for a startup, an engineering startup doing telecommunications. And unfortunately, we lost our funding. So I had to decide, okay, what am I going to do next? What really is the next step for me? And thankfully, my mom, recommended a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad with Robert Kiyosaki. And so after reading that, I wanted to get really into real estate. And at that point, my brother and I worked together to start on single family homes, which many people start in real estate in the States, single family homes, investing and remodeling them and improving them and selling them. And so we did that for several years until the next recession. And then my brother went on to another business, but I found what I really love doing is this real estate. And I took my engineering background to improve processes in construction and evaluating a property and doing the renovation. And in 2009, I started in multifamily. And so from then on, I've been in multifamily exclusively and been doing that now. This is my 13th year.
Wow. Interesting, Bryan. Bryan, the listener is an investor, so-called limited partner. Let's talk about the GP. When exactly is actually a GP calling you, and what are then the next step you usually do?
Sure. So as a limited partner, you're dependent upon the general partner to put together the deal, find the apartment complex, put together a syndication, and then offer this to the limited partner. Well, the general partner works with my company either for the due diligence or for the construction to kind of help evaluate first and then execute that renovation plan. And they're doing that all on behalf of the limited partner. So the limited partner gets the benefit of the general partner's work and effort.
So then the GPs usually call you once they have assigned what they call a letter of intent, or even earlier. How's that?
It's a funny thing. I would like to evaluate more properties, but there's only so much time in the day. And it's best for them to reach out to me right after they have a signed letter of intent, because this market is so competitive. I may work with 1, 2, 3 different investors, and they don't win that deal. And so once they've won the deal, they get that letter of intent. That's the first step, and that's usually about a week or 2 weeks before they have what's next is called the PSA, or purchase and sale agreement, and that's when they finalize their contract. So during that 2-week period, you're scheduling, making sure that once they sign that PSA, we're there on the ground to do what we call due diligence, our physical due diligence evaluation of the property, so that we can make sure we have our good budget for renovation.
So if you do due diligence, it's like you take your time to discover any possible issues that could be occurring in and around the building, such as leakage from pipes, HVAC, ducting, plumbing, cracks in the roofing, concrete structure, glass, etc., carpeting, ceiling tiles. So there's a lot of things you have to do, right? And let's talk about the mistake a lot of GPs are doing. How could it be that in 3 years or even 4 years you might inspect the property again, and you are very surprised to see the property in a even more worse condition than when you saw it 3 years ago, right?
Exactly. So and that's happening more often these days than it did early in my business, because I think deals are so competitive and the margins are so tight and prices have risen that general partners make the mistake of cutting the renovation budget too thin to make, quote, the deal work. And they really didn't have enough to do all the things that they intended to do over the life of that hold period of while they're owning the property over 3 or 4 years. So what happens is they've under budgeted and they spent that money in the first year or two, but then they still hold the property for another couple of years to execute their business plan. And then I have the privilege of seeing many properties, and particularly in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And sometimes I see these properties 2 or 3 times over a decade. And when I see it again and it's actually in worse condition, I know that they've run out of money and they're trying to do some capital expenditures out of their operational budget to do some bigger items like roof repair or foundation.
So we are doing the GP is doing a due diligence together with you because you don't want any surprises, right? It's all about that. You do not want to close on a deal and afterwards you have a big surprise. How much should a GP budget per door nowadays in the DFW area? Is there like a rule of thumb?
Right. When I first started, it was $3,000 per door would be a rule of thumb. And now it's definitely $5,000 per door or higher. Now, so that gives you a starting point, right? Just a rule of thumb. So if you had a 200 unit deal, you have $1 million renovation budget. The reality is that $1 million doesn't go as far as it used to, maybe just 5-6 years ago. So what I see is, so let's say $5,000 per door is a good rule of thumb, but GPs are actually trimming that even lower just to make the deal work. So 5,000 is a good rule of thumb if you actually stick to that number and you know the scope that's involved in that estimate.
And you really do not want any unexpected surprises, right? And for example, after you close the deal and then you find out that all of the electrical wiring in the space is aluminum.
Exactly. That would be quite a surprise, because we like to see copper wiring and that's what's standard in most newer properties. But these 60s properties, that sometimes, they're a C plus class property from 1965 to 1973, it was very common to have aluminum wiring in the walls. So the in the walls is not really a problem, but it's at switches and plugs where they make that connection. That's where you have a potential for a spark or corrosion, and that could lead to potentially a fire. So when you do your due diligence, you need to make sure on those properties that you take out the switch and the plug and you look at it to make sure that you physically know what wiring that is there. So that's definitely something that you don't want to have after you've taken over a property.
How much is the cost for replacing that?
It's not feasible to replace the wiring all itself, but you can replace the connections on the ends where you have your switches and plugs. So for example, an average unit is going to have about 20 openings per unit, and that costs about $25 per connection, per opening, to change those to a retrofitted device. So, that's about $500 per unit. So those costs can add up fairly quickly, and they're often required by your insurance company when you take over the property, if they discover as well that you have aluminum wiring that needs to be retrofitted.
We don't want surprises, and you just mentioned it, to find out that insurance companies come out to the property and they are raising the insurance premium by $10,000 because of some of the hazards, for example, on the property.
Exactly. So, Dallas-Fort Worth market is a great market to own real estate here in Texas. However, one of the negative things is we do have high insurance rates. So those have been increasing over the last few years, and they've gone from, when I first started, $200 per unit is a good rule of thumb. Well, now $400 per unit, that's double the cost, is a great deal. We own a property right now that's, about $550 per unit. So it's more than the $10,000. They're raising it, $20,000, $25,000, $50,000, even while you hold the property. So you definitely want to make sure you take care of these items. You know about them before you buy the property. And then if you have to do something like change out the switches and plugs, you do that within the first few months. And then you qualify for a discounted rate on your insurance, which is very important for the overall deal.
Yeah, again, I repeat another one. You don't want surprises, right? Like finding out that the renovations in general are going to cost you $100,000 more than what you planned. Was not planned, right? Or for example, utility bills are 20% higher than you have budgeted for. Or for you, for example, the main plumbing line is actually 2 inches and should be 4 inches. And that could also cost a lot of money.
Exactly. So it all goes back to your original estimating and how accurate you are on evaluating the property, and then what is your renovation plan to get, the name of the game is to buy the property, improve its value, improve its cash flow, and then sell it for a profit, of course. So if you don't properly evaluate the property in the beginning, and then you don't have a good renovation plan, it messes up your overall business plan. So having a property with an extra $100,000 in renovation costs is really a problem, but that can be discovered beforehand, right? So there's really a process to determine exactly how much that's going to cost, and then utility bills. It's good as the general partner to research what's the historical amount of utility bills that have been on that property for the last year. And then that helps you predict in the future. And there might be a potential savings there. And then definitely plumbing is another issue that we want to carefully watch. So one of the things that is important to do while you do your physical inspection is actually scope the lines under the buildings. So you can actually take a camera and go under the building, and see the diameter to see if there's any roots in the line or any shifting that's caused a break in the line. Because another thing we have in Texas, particularly in North Texas, is soil that tends to move. So that might cause foundation issues and it might cause plumbing issues. So you really need to scope those lines with a camera, and then you can get your estimate. So you're not faced with these surprises.
Or a GP after closing, he doesn't want that 20% of the HVAC units need new compressors. How much are the costs on those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another thing that's important to watch for. So when you have an individual air conditioning system for each unit, you're going to have two components. The outside part is going to be the compressor or the condenser. And then on the inside, it's going to be the evaporator coil and the air handler. So there's two components. So both of those together, about $4,000 per system. And that's getting pretty tight where that's apartment pricing. If you did a residential single family, that could be, a little bit more than that. So, those add up, right? So you want to be careful and make sure you properly evaluate those before you buy the property.
Or a GP after closing doesn't want to find out that they need to add 4 new handicapped parking spaces because it's not in compliance. I think that costs also quite a lot of money, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting that you wouldn't think would be, a big deal is just parking lot maintenance in general. And what's surprising is that depending on your lender, they want to make sure your parking lot is pristine. And they want to fill any potholes and the striping and what we call the stenciling for any, handicapped disabled spaces that they're properly marked. And what I found over the years is that parking lot is one of the things that's easy for an inspector to pick on because they hardly have to get out of their car to take a look at it and to, reevaluate the parking lot. And so they throw in a budget number that then they give to the lender that you have to do. So let's just, it's kind of a rule of thumb for resurfacing a parking lot to make it all, nice and black could be about 50 cents per square foot. But if you need to do an overlay, that could be $2 or $3 per square foot. And you're typically talking about 20 to 30,000 square feet on a parking lot. So again, that could add up.
That could add up, yeah. Or a huge number of work orders that haven't been attended to in the space units for tenants, that's going to cost an extra 10,000 or even more, right?
Exactly. And that you bring up a really good point because a lot of GPs may not look at this backlog, even look back farther than 3 months. Because when an owner is looking to sell, they're looking to trim the cost as much as possible before they sell. So if you have lower maintenance costs, that means your net operating income is higher and the value of your property is greater. So they tend to cut out services like security, maintenance on the landscaping, and the work orders. So they artificially decrease the maintenance costs and it increases their NOI and it looks good. But a wise, GP would look back, okay, how about 6 months ago? Or what was your work order amount that you were doing a year ago? And they should have those records, right? So yes, so that's a good way to look back on their operations to make sure you aren't caught by surprise.
Yeah, that's well said. Or after closing, you don't want to find out that you actually got a drug lab and gangs. You don't want that, right? Do you have a story to tell us about and some lessons learned?
Okay. Yeah. So what's funny is what you find, the range of different living conditions with apartments. So you mentioned the drug lab. Absolutely. We've come across active drug activity in an apartment complex. There's relatively less of that as we tend to go to better quality properties over the last few years, but it still does happen. And one other common thing that you might not expect is that if you have an owner that's owned the property for a long time, the residents tend to kind of take things into their own hands. And I've gone into a unit where they've made additional bedrooms. So the living area is now converted to a bedroom. And the dining room is now, has bunk beds in it. So, and they've actually made walls, right? So they have a framed and everything because the owner hadn't been in there a long time. So you see that the capacity, they've kind of doubled the occupancy of the unit. And then another example is where we almost got all of the units because we like to walk a good percentage. And just a few years ago, we talked to the owner, hey, we can't get into this one unit. And they said, oh, no big deal. Nothing's wrong with it. And it's fine. So we listened to the owner at that time. Well, come to find out, it was a fire unit that was completely stripped and bare. It was burned. And so there were no kitchen appliances, no cabinets, and the flooring was bad. So that ended up costing $35,000 to do that. So the moral of the story is don't skip units, get into almost everything you can when you do your due diligence.
Visit www.usmultifamilyrealestate.com to meet like-minded people with a focus on B and C class underperforming apartments in uptrending U.S. markets that can be repositioned toward the rapidly growing workforce. This is housing using a community lifestyle management approach.
And do you have a solution to any problems that might come up? Like, do you have tools or checklists, for example, or what would you recommend?
Exactly. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give your listeners the top 10 things to look for when you're checking out a property. So I'm just going to list them quickly. And these are the things you should have a budget for when you evaluate a property. So you're looking at a property, or you're a limited partner, ask the GP, do you have a budget for these items? So these are roof, foundation, your sewer line, domestic hot water, HVAC, electrical, exterior repairs, and then parking lot, and then termite. So here in the States, we have termite activity. So that's often required by the lender. So that's another item that you just need to have. And then, of course, interior repairs. These are my top 10 items that you need to have a budget for. And then bonus items, I would call exterior lighting. You can really improve a property with exterior lighting. And then your landscaping, signage, you want to be able to see the name of the property, and then your amenities. If you hit these items, you're well on your way to have an accurate renovation cost for your property.
That's fantastic, Bryan. Thank you. Now let's talk about you as a GP. So that would be your company, Omni Multifamily Investments. Now, what is your investment strategy? Meaning, what are you uniquely trying to do? Why are you the one to do it? And what's in it for me as an investor to go on the ride with you?
I'd love to have you on the ride. So, it's changed over the years. And I always wanted to be a general partner. And I think we leverage our experience as a due diligence assessment company, and then we're a construction company as well, to really evaluate properties accurately. And so we know going in exactly how much it's going to cost and what's needed for a renovation. And so that experience, where now we've done over 70,000 units over the last decade or so, that we have a unique perspective on properties, and certainly know this market area in Texas. But one of the things that I see that's changing over the last few years is that, yes, I have this experience in renovation and construction, but I'm looking at better quality properties because I'm looking to hold a little bit longer, maybe 5 to 7 years instead of 2 or 3 years. So we look at better quality properties because as these renovation costs do increase, it makes it hard to do that fix and flip that people used to do maybe in 2015, 16, 17, and even 18. So I'm looking at better properties for longer hold periods that are more stable for my limited partner investors.
So that's like a B plus or B or even A?
B plus to A minus. Location is key. And can it withstand the market ups and downs over the next 5 years instead of just a couple of years?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm already on the ride with you with one deal. You're doing a fantastic job, Bryan. You're really good in communicating, and we're really happy.
That's excellent. Excellent to hear. So one of the things that's a little bit different that I do is I like to do a quick video clip of the property, how it's going, and give an update to the investors so they can feel like they're actually walking the property. If you flew over here and came to Dallas, when you walk the property, that's exactly what it's going to look like. And so I like to convey that to my partners.
Yeah, I always see you on the roof also, and on Facebook. One can add you as a friend, I guess, if one is serious, and one can see all your cool videos on the roof, especially, and also your other funny pictures you're sometimes posting. That's
excellent. Yes, I love to have people as Facebook friends, and I like to just show people while I'm working, while I'm out doing what I love doing, and so I capture that when I can.
How can people contact you?
Of course, by email. So it's my full name, Bryan Amos, BryanAmos, at theomnigroup.com. That's spelled TheOmni group, group.com. So Bryan Amos at the Omni Group. That's a great way to get a hold of me. And of course, reach out on Facebook. Again, Bryan Amos. I'm there on Facebook. You can follow me.
And what would be the topic? Would they, if they have a question, or what would you recommend? Or do you have like a checklist that you can give away? Or
sure, I'd be glad to give them this checklist that we mentioned, and we have that in a PDF form that we could send to you. And then any questions you have about investing in the States, and encourage them to listen to podcasts like this where they get this hands-on information.
Bryan, do you have a mantra or a battle cry or a favorite quote?
So last year I started a training program with a business mentor, Jamie Stenhouse, and he's in Australia. And so I picked up his saying and that I appreciate. It's very simple. It comes down to, he says, do the work. So we can talk a lot about a lot of things, but just do the work. That's my mantra for now.
That's cool. Any book recommendations?
The basics of investing in real estate. Joe Fairless has one that I think is very useful. And my friend Matt Pacini just has released a book, Backstage Pass to Real Estate. But he just released his book that I did enjoy. So just behind the scenes of what actually goes into a real estate investment.
Okay. And how about your outlook for you and your investment company?
This is a busy time in the market. So last year was my best year ever in due diligence, number of transactions. And this year we expect it to be the same. Well, that also translates over to the investment side. We think this will be a very good year for investing in apartments.
When are you coming to Europe? I think Scotland is something you were coming before, right?
Yes. So a few years ago, I went to England and Scotland and enjoyed that immensely. Here, the travel's been a little bit more difficult, but I'm thinking 2023 is my year, Marcel. and we're headed to Switzerland.
Oh, that's great. Then looking forward to that.
Excellent.
Bryan, you've been a great guest, as always, very professional, and I really enjoyed speaking to you and having you here on the show. I appreciate your time always, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Marcel. Enjoyed being here.
Thank you, Bryan. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.
Danke, dass du reingeschaut hast bei Stars and Stripes, deine US-Immobilienshow. Melde dich an für diesen Podcast, hinterlasse eine Review und vernetze dich mit Marcel auf deiner Lieblings-Social-Media-Plattform.